Hello and welcome to Letters Home, a story of a World War II B-17 pilot from Lowell, Michigan, in his own words. And he just so happens to be my grandpa. I'm your host, Annie Whitlock, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, my dad, Mitch McMahon, my aunt, Lori McMahon Summerfield, and Dale Croft from the Lowell Historical Museum.
In each episode of Letters Home, we're going to dive into letters written by my dad during his time in World War II that he sent to his parents, siblings, and friends back home in Lowell, Michigan. We'll be reading his own words and giving some context as to what was happening in the world and in Lowell at the time he wrote these.
In this episode, we'll learn about one of Dad's busiest weeks in the Army. He flew 4 missions, including 3 that were some of the deadliest in the history of the 8th Air Force. This week was known as Black Week.
Yeah. It's quite a week that this episode covers. But before we get into all that stuff, I got a hold of some addresses that might help solve some of our unknown questions from the last episode or create more questions. It could go either way. The 1920 census showed that Frank and Lotta lived with Lotta's parents on Hudson Street. And by 1940, they lived on 3 Jackson Street. So I think that's interesting. And then so they've had several houses, I think, and maybe Lotta's parents were the ones that lived on Hudson Street the most, and they moved in with them for a while.
The Sayers, S-A-Y-R-E.
Yeah.
That's Susan's middle name.
Oh, okay.
Sayer.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that was
so
their Lotta Sayer.
And then by 1950, they lived on James Street. So at least we're getting closer to Reservoir Hill. I mean, James Street's on Reservoir Hill. I mean, it's on its way. We're climbing the hill. For those of you not in Lowell, we can describe it. So we get closer to the hill as the years go on. But so I don't know. Maybe they owned all these houses and went kind of back and forth, or who knows. But anyway, so kind of answers some things, but mostly leaves a lot of questions, I think.
And repeating, you said Lotta and Frank were Dad's mom and dad. We're always trying to remember to remind that that's what this is.
Yep, so Lotta and Frank are Bruce's parents, and they ended up living with Lotta's parents.
Yeah.
I don't know their names off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I did at one point.
We'll figure it out.
So if you have any additions, corrections, you know where these places are, please comment, message us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. We'll bring it up. I did Google where 112 Hudson Street is, and it's basically the BP on the corner, but maybe we'll get that general area right across from the Historical Museum. We'll see if we can find out more about where they used to live in Lowell. We're going to start the letters today with a letter that Bruce started to his parents on Sunday, October 3rd, but he didn't actually finish it until Tuesday, October 5th, 1943, and he notes this in his letter, so in his own words.
Dear Mother and Dad, 'tis Sunday, rather a gray Sunday, with a cool wind blowing. Of course, Sunday is the same as any other day. Ships overhead continuously. There's rarely any time of the day or night that you can't hear engines roaring overhead. When this is all over, I'm going to enjoy not hearing ships and their engines, and I'll probably be lonesome without them. Just to show you how things go, 'tis now Monday night, and lots happened since then. Still, it was more of a less the same around here. It just shows how fast they do things over here. Reading the paper tonight, I thought maybe if I clipped out an ad, you might enjoy it. You'll notice that their coffee comes in a bottle and contains chicory. Well, good thing, they're tea drinkers. When I came back to the barracks this afternoon, there were 2 letters from Dad, one September 9 and the other dated the 18th. Both continued the usual $2, and I'm getting now a bit superstitious about these 2 bills. Always send them when you can write to me, Dad. Over here, the people get a kick out of our money, so they come in handy. Gosh, I hope Byrne doesn't have to go. To even consider taking him away from the plant sounds like the typical draft board blunder. In considering a location for an airfield around Lowell, you should consider its availability to town, and also be sure that you get plenty of runway room. 5,000 feet long or a mile long is not a bit too much. If you couldn't find room for diagonals this long, figure on having at least one that long with shorter ones for lighter planes. Or if your long strip was laid with the prevailing winds, it would be suitable because heavy ships aren't too affected by crosswinds. Again, this letter has become delayed as it's now Tuesday night. I'm certainly going to finish it by this evening. It's uncommon for me to let 3 days slip by without at least dropping a V-mail to someone. But don't take it from this that I'm terribly busy. True, I have plenty to go, but also a lot of leisure time. This afternoon I received 4 letters. 2 from Mother, dated September 7th and 13th, 1 from Betty, and 1 from Bern, dated September 22nd. Quite a haul for one day. You asked again, Mother, or rather you stated that you weren't sure where I was. Well, by the time you receive this letter, you'll have probably known for a long time. The article that M. Avery gave you probably gives you a good picture of my life here. Of course, it'll probably be prettied up a bit for civilian consumption. But still, it'll give you a better picture of my activities than I could. I was just now looking for the clipping, the coffee ad. I was going to send with this, but I've lost it. I'll have to send one another time. I'm going to mail this now, so it'll be sent and leave tonight. All my love, your loving son, J. Bruce.
Yeah, so when he says a lot has happened since Sunday, and it took him 3 days to write this letter or to finish this letter, he means more missions. So from what I could tell, Bruce flew 4 or 5 missions in the first 2 weeks of October 1943, and we're going to talk about a few of them in this episode. But since this letter mentions a little bit of Lowell news, we're going to focus on that first. So Bruce mentions locating an airfield near Lowell. Dale, you're a resident Lowell expert. What can you tell us about the Lowell airport? Did it come to Lowell around this time? Is that what he's talking about?
Well, he loved to fly, right? He got his pilot license in Ionia, though, right?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Right?
I did.
According to his, so there was no place for these young guys that wanted to fly could fly. But actually, 100 years ago, a gentleman named George McCarthy built a plane called the Air Scout. And he started a aeronautical factory here in Lowell called McCarthy Aeronautical.
What?
Yeah, he started a factory. He flew it. It's a really neat old plane that he built himself, and he flew it around here. But he started a airplane factory here in Lowell at the old Chase Furniture Building in September of 1925. And production began. The factory was expected to produce 5 planes a day. On December 3rd, 1925, so just over 100 years ago, George McCarthy made trial flights around town from the field on a farm west of M21. So all these young kids were seeing this plane flying around. And so he set the seeds here
100 years ago.
Okay.
So in an article in the Ledger, it said, interest dated December 8th, 1932. Interest growing in Lowell Airport. So from 1925 to 1932 now, we start to see more things. Interest in aeronautics in the Lowell Airport project opportunities continue to grow, and considerable activity has already been displayed. So from 1932, it took until 1944 for the Board of Trade to finally get everything rolling where they actually were going to get an airport
Okay, well,
north
right
of Lowell. They looked at property on M21, but it ended up being north of Lowell where it is today.
Where it is today. Okay.
In February of 1946, a committee was appointed by the Lowell Board of Trade. It gave a report recommending the field that had been used for takeoff and landing for the past summer, which was north of Lowell. It was all grass fields. So in March of 1946, C.H. Runtsman and L.W. Rutherford bought the field of 50 acres and donated it to the city to make an airport. In October of 1947, State Aeronautical Department inspectors designated the Lowell Airport a Class 1 airport. There were 1,800-foot runways, a hangar for 3 planes, oil and gasoline facilities, and restrooms. The state approved the field and operator for training under the GI Bill, and classes were to start in a week. So in 1946, the airport finally got put where we see it today. Now, it has improved to 72 acres. It has 3 runways. 1 is paved, and it is 2,400 feet long. And then there's 2 grass runways that are 2,700 feet long and 2,000 feet long. So
Still a lot shorter than what Dad
I never realized there was a paved runway there. I always thought when you drive by, you always see grass. Mm-hmm. But it all started 100 years ago, December, what was it, 5th or whatever, with George McCarthy.
Okay. Well,
Crazy.
that's cool. Yeah, that's so great. And so the St. Mary's Cemetery where Grandpa is buried is right next to the airport.
Yep.
So
Right.
he's probably hearing planes all the time.
Oh, yeah. They fly right over his gravesite.
There you go. He's still hearing the planes. So that's interesting. That did happen right around this time.
Yeah.
All right, now it's time for our segment where we reveal some information we know about Bruce's flight missions. And if you remember from last week, we have to consult flight records and mission diaries from the historical website of the 306 Bomb Group and all of its squadrons, which keep up a very detailed collection of mission reports and all sorts of things. So we're first, because Bruce can't mention these in his letters. He doesn't give like that
Yeah,
kind of
I think
detail.
that's important to say.
Yes.
That we didn't have any idea. We read these letters, but you wouldn't have had any idea where this took place.
No, not at all. So we have to match up like the dates of his letters and then go back to this website and look it up. And sometimes Bruce's name appears in the mission report, so we could be like, oh, he was on that mission and that was on this day, and we can go back to the letter he wrote that day. But yeah, we're having to kind of do that
my
matching
golly
up.
gosh.
That's how I do it anyway.
You historians.
So first we're going to talk about Bruce's mission to Frankfurt on October 4th, 1943, and we're going to start with the combat diary.
The 368's turn to lead the entire 1st Bomb Division to the target came today, and our lead crew, Captain George Paris as pilot, led the force straight over the center of the VDK propeller works at Frankfurt. While our own bombs were a shade short, the path was marked out for the groups following to get on the target proper, and there was the extra satisfaction of hitting the very airplane parts that make it possible for the FW-190s and the Messerschmitts to get into the air. P-47s gave protection where it was needed most, up to the target. After bombs away, enemy singles and twins were thick for 3/4 of an hour. 3 of the 4 group claims of the day fell to the guns of our squadron. Sergeant Stephen J. Crisco and Sergeant William J. Meade both knocked down FW-190s. And meanwhile, the gunner of Lieutenant Paul Paulson's group, which was forced to turn back because of a runway prop just before the target, were throwing lead out as they dove for the cloud over 2,000 feet. And another FW-190 fell to Sergeant Travis F. Powell in the top turret. All of our crews came back safely. Lieutenants Roy Rank, William Nally, William Katz, and George Gorish and their crews also made the trip.
So Bruce flew as a co-pilot with William Katz on here again.
Okay.
So, and it looks like maybe his flight was one that actually aborted the bombing, from what I could tell from the mission diary. I think this was the lots happening that he was referring to in this letter. That's at least the start of that long letter at the top of this episode. He also wrote a letter to Ed and Marion that also maybe references this mission to Frankfurt. So in his own words.
October 6th, 1943, 7:30 at night. Dear Ed and Sis, everything's okay on this front. How's the home front? Not to change the subject, but boy, what a day and night we'll have when this bloomin' mess is over. I'm going to insist on you drinking all the different concoctions I know now, Ed. Wow, will that be some time? Denver Skyrockets, Blockbusters, Mexican Flips, RAF Sippers, WRN Ren Specials, and a couple others I don't remember now. Anyway, it will be a time we'll all remember. And don't think I'm not going to make it. I'll be there if I have to crawl all the way back on my knees. The last raid I was on was a Lulu. Plenty of flak, plenty of enemy fighters, plenty of thrills. Incidentally, I'll have enough for a lifetime when this is over. Thrills, I mean. Still, isn't bad, and my steely nerves, as you put it, Sis, are none the worse for the wear. In fact, after your first few raids, you don't mind it and seem to develop a nice philosophy about the whole thing. Perhaps the only thing that would get me is if I dwell on the results 30 seconds or so after Norm says, bombs away. Of course, sitting way up where I do, you seem a bit detached from the ground, so the results are nothing more or less than spots you see on the pictures you took. I don't know how many are killed, and I don't want to know. 'Tis really a sight that always gives me a kick to walk back through the bomb bay and see those ugly-looking eggs nestled so cozy-like in their racks. I started writing again after talking about 2 hours with a Polish pilot that we have here in our same barracks. Not the least of the enjoyable diversions I have over here is in talking with this fellow. His name is Kosmanski, and we call him Kos, like in because. He and I have spent many evenings talking together. I've learned so much about the continent from him. He insists that I visit Budapest, as he claims it claims the most beautiful women come from Romania and Hungary. I have listened by the hour to his descriptions of Vienna nights and also to his holidays in the Austrian and Polish mountains, skiing lodges, elaborate parties, etc., etc. It's really swell to talk with him and maybe someday to be able to see the places he speaks of. But home still sounds like the best deal. From all our talks, we have become very good friends, and we have learned from each other about our own countries. His big question tonight was, what are the Mormons like? Do they have 6 or 7 wives? Of course, I put him right on a lot of things. Well, it's too late now to continue this due to my talk with Cause, so I'll hit the hay. Your loving brother, J. Bruce. P.S. Tell Bats I enjoyed her last letter so very much and that I'll try to answer her letter and Joe's as soon as I have time. P.S. The World Series score just came in, and that makes it a 1 apiece now. I'm proud on the Yanks.
I have a pound on it.
I have a pound on the Yanks. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a pound, $1.
Sorry.
He's got a bet.
Yeah, that's right.
He's got a bet on the
That's
Yanks.
right. And you said he won that. Oh, anyway.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry.
There's 0. Bruce talks a lot about flak in his letters. In fact, flak, that word is mentioned like a ton in the mission diaries and stuff, like ran into flak. There's like a sign on their barracks, which I'll have to put from his scrapbook. We'll have to put that in. I think it's in one of the letters coming up.
I think it is.
Where he's the home of the flak happy eager beavers or something. So what is flak? Dale, what can you tell us about this?
Flak is a type of ground anti-aircraft gun that fires explosive shells at enemy aircraft. The term comes from the German word, and I'm not even going to attempt this, but I'll spell it for you. FLIEGERABWEHRKANONE, which translates to aircraft defense gun.
I can see why they just called it flak. Okay.
For those of you out there, try to figure it out.
Okay.
Try to figure out.
You know
what it is.
German, let us know.
And send it to us. We'd like to hear some pronunciations of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, there were 3 models, the Flak 36, Flak 41, and the 88mm. All 3 could be mounted on mobile platforms, allowing them to be quickly repositioned to engage different threats for aircraft and tank defense. Guns use a combination of radar and optical instruments to track and target enemy aircraft that were positioned at certain angles to create a pattern of bursts at the intended altitude of the approaching aircraft. So they kind of figured a block, and they tried to hit a block with those shells hitting in there. The German 88 Flak was considered one of the best guns in World War II due to its remarkable versatility, allowing it to be used effectively against both aircraft and tanks, making it a feared weapon by Allied forces. Thanks to its high accuracy, powerful shells, and ability to quickly switch between anti-aircraft and anti-tank ammunition depending on the target, essentially acting as a multi-purpose gun on the battlefield. The 88mm shell had a high muzzle velocity, enabling it to reach high altitudes to engage aircraft and penetrate the armor of tanks effectively. Different types of shells could be used depending on the target, including high explosive anti-craft rounds for air defense and armor-piercing rounds to combat tanks. When an 8mm projectile exploded at altitude, it sent out jagged metal fragments that tore through nearby aircraft. It also left a characteristic black cloud hanging in the sky, which would be, if I was flying, those black clouds popping off all around, and you knew flak was coming. Is it going to hit your plane? Due to its reputation for effectiveness against both air and ground targets, the 8mm flak was feared by Allied airmen, tankers, and foot soldiers, creating a significant psychological impact on the battlefield. So the 88 was the major baby.
Okay.
So the smoke, that's the remnants of the shell exploding, and then they fall, and then they fly into it?
No, the explosion would just shoot them. Shoot to pieces every direction. So you didn't know where they were coming. I mean, you were hoping if they were off to the left. They were coming from every direction, especially if they were in that, that block that they tried to hit. There'd be, I don't know. It showed a diagram that looked like there was like 30 or 40 shells going off in this block with black puffs of smoke. So you got fragments just flying all over the place, ripping through the fuselages.
I remember Dad talking about being on the ground, because you said something about
the foot soldiers. Yeah.
Soldiers. But I remember Dad talking about being in the city, and he said when you heard, and I guess they knew which plane by the sound, you just stepped underneath the awnings, or you stepped underneath, and all the flak would come down on the street.
Yeah.
And then you just move back out and start walking again.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, you mean you'd know? He said, oh, yeah, you knew when it was coming, and you just moved underneath into the store and waited and then got back out.
Geez, just like when it's raining or something, as if it's the same. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Right.
Well, Bruce's squadron runs into a lot of flack on a few missions he goes on this particular week. In fact, this week was known as Black Week for the 8th Air Force. Like, that's how, this is like a famous week in the war, this early October 1943, because there were 3 deadly and exhausting missions in a row on October 8th, 9th, and 10th. So 3 days in a row, they were on these deadly missions, and Bruce was involved in all of them in some way. On October 8th, he co-piloted a mission over Bremen, Germany, which resulted in a lot of enemy action. So this is a quick little blurb from the report from Bruce's top turret gunner, James Norman.
Enemy aircraft ME-109 came in from 12 o'clock, slightly above, passing over this aircraft. Top turret opened fire at 700 yards and continued firing until enemy aircraft went over at 100 feet. Enemy aircraft was seen to explode behind this aircraft.
Yeah, so
I feel like cheering.
He shot down a German plane on his way to Bremen. James Norman did, Bruce's plane. Also during this Bremen raid, though, his bombardier Norm was shot down and was missing in action. So we've heard Norm mentioned on here quite a bit, even in the top of this episode when Norm says bombs away. Norm was actually flying with another pilot on this mission, and the Bremen raid was described as rough, just big letters. They just wrote rough in the mission report. I did find out from digging in this 306 bomb group website that Norm didn't die. So there's good. He survived. He was a POW in the Stalag 3 camp. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which was the same prison camp that was featured on Masters of the Air. And it was that prison camp from the movie Great Escape.
Ooh, okay.
So if you remember
Steve
those,
McQueen.
yeah. So that's where Norm ended up. But I also found something really cool. Again, digging through this 306 website. You can go down. I can go down rabbit holes on this website, but I gave him a shout out today on Instagram because I use so much of their stuff. But they asked like veterans later after the war to write their memories of the war. And they sent a form to Bruce, and in 1990 he filled it out.
Didn't know that.
Yeah,
Me neither.
And he sent it back to the bomb group, and it was filed in there. So if you search his name, it pops up as in 1990 he sent this note back. So he says that Bremen was one of the most memorable times in the war.
Oh my gosh.
So this is what Bruce wrote about Bremen in 1990 to the Historical Society. This is in his own words, even though it wasn't in a letter.
Raid on Bremen. I was leading the high group. Lead group dropped on 4 corners when Bremen, clearly visible with heavy flak over the city, was 30 miles ahead. We passed over 4 corners, a wheat field, and dropped on target with good results. Returning for critique, Lieutenant Colonel Raber chewed me for not dropping on the lead group, Wheatfield. I never got over Wheatfield, Raber. So now you know my stupid memoirs.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know, he got chewed out for not doing something right on the Bremen raid. I don't know, enough to stick with him in 1990 to write this memory.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So anyway, I thought that was funny.
So they were supposed to drop it in the wheat field?
I don't know, I guess. I'm not sure.
It hit the target with good results, it says.
Yeah, so that was, that was successful. So I guess he doesn't know why he's getting chewed out.
You remember getting
by
chewed out,
Colonel Raber. So that was October 8th. Remember, Black Week, 3 straight days. So on October 9th, Bruce again flew as a co-pilot with William Katz, to Gdynia. I think that's how you say it, right? Yeah, Gdynia, Poland. It's Polish, so I had to look this up. Gdynia, Poland, which was a huge undertaking involving several different squadrons. In fact, like the mission diary talks about men like learning the strategy and like audibly gasping at how crazy it was. On October 10th, 1943, he piloted a mission to Coesfeld, Germany. And here's a description from that one, from the combat diary on October 10th.
Leading the group on this raid, which had Munster for a target, the squadron put 6 ships in the air. Captain Joseph Belser was leading with the Lieutenants Alfred Simon and Eduardo Montoya as lead navigator and bombardier, respectively. Lieutenants William Nally, J. Bruce McMahon, George Goris, Joseph Gay, J.P. Nowak, and their crews followed. Led by the 92nd Group, the crews dropped their bombs on a target of opportunity, the railroad junction at Coesfield, with good effect, and came home safely after a rather uneventful mission.
I'm glad the mission was uneventful this time, but the bigger mission wasn't, because he mentions Munster was the target, but they ended up dropping the bombs on Coesfeld as a target of opportunity, I guess, right? Like, we're here, we might as well mess some stuff up while we're here. But
wonder what Cause thought about dropping bombs on Poland.
I don't know. Yeah, that's true.
Country.
Well, it was occupied by Germans at that point, so he's already lost his home country at that point. But anyway, it mentions that Munster was the main target for this October 10th mission, and Munster part did not go well. Bruce was lucky he only made it to Coesfeld, I think. Dale, what can you tell us about the mission to Munster on October 10th, 1943?
The bombing of Munster, Germany on October 10th, 1943 was a devastating World War II mission that caused significant damage to German industrial facilities. The raid was part of the Allied strategy to weaken Germany's war effort. The raid was the first daytime raid by the United States 8th Air Force and was part of a series of missions known as Black Week.
Yeah, there we go.
Here's a quote I found from a briefing officer of the 95th Bomb Group relayed a change in tactics. Unlike all previous military and industrial targets attacked to date by the 8th Air Force, today will be different. Very different, he said. Today, you will hit the center of the city, the homes of the working population. The aiming point, the briefing officer said, would be the steps of the medieval cathedral.
Wow.
According to the plan, the B-17s would arrive over the target at high noon, the exact time Sunday Mass let out at the cathedral.
Oh, goodness.
Major John
cruel.
Egan led 236 B-17 Flying Fortress bombers in the raid. In the end, the so-called nail in the coffin for the 8th Air Force was the German planes. While it was not uncommon for German planes to attack the Americans in the midst of a mission, the Munster raid was different. The Germans had hundreds of planes prepared to attack the B-17s before they got to target, during the target, and as they were leaving the target.
Oh, wow.
And these numbers were simply overwhelming. The Germans were able to pick off the air forces easily. There were estimated to be approximately 350 German planes present at the Munster raid.
Gosh.
Another quote, Rodney Snow of the 95th recalled, "The enemy fighters were concentrated in numbers such as we had not seen on any of my crew's 20 previous missions. Wave after wave of German aircraft made head-on passes. As one wave of fighters broke away, another slashed through the B-17 formation, and then another and another. The Germans passed so close that we could see the scarves around their enemy pilots' necks. They were able to cause significant damage to German industrial facilities, but the raid killed nearly 700 civilians. 30 American bombers were shot down, and 105 were badly damaged. 308 American airmen and officers went missing. The Munster raid wrapped up the bloodiest 3 days in 8th Air Force's history to that point. We'll find out it wasn't the worst.
It wasn't the worst.
88 B-17s had been lost in 3 days, nearly 900 men. The Munster raid was a disastrous mission for the 100th Bomb Group, with only one plane out of 13 returning. Their bomb group became known as the Bloody 100th, which is Masters of Air that was on TV. Mm-hmm. The 8th Army Force stated that the reason for the target was the fact that a large portion of the German rail workers lived in Munster, and as a large rail city like Munster was ripe for bombing. That was their justification for bombing the civilian people. So,
That's rough.
900 men, 88 B-17s gone.
Wow.
It does seem like Bruce is sort of like just missing some of the crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Like he's getting enough of it, obviously, but like he's not going into Munster. He's going like halfway there, right, to Coesfeld and dropping a target of somewhere else. So if he was gone to Munster, we might not be here. I mean, right? He has the day off at Schweinfurt, which is next week or whatever.
900 men, my goodness.
And so,
Well,
we're here to do this podcast.
a couple of these missions, we have actual photos that he
Yes.
took or his crew took
Yeah.
of a picture of the bombs hitting or going out of the bomb bay. So they'll be in our primary resources in our video production, et cetera.
Again, I remember what Poland looks like from the air because it's so distinct. The what the ground looks like.
Yeah,
It's
fields
It,
and-
yeah, the
yeah.
fields. They're just so different than everything else. And I remember looking and going, "Oh, that's Poland." Oh,
Yeah, well, we
Yeah.
can see it from Bruce's perspective. All right, so we're going to finish with a letter that Bruce wrote to his parents on October 11th, 1943, the day after Munster, and kind of right after his Coesfeld raid, in his own words.
Monday, October 11th, 1943. Dear Mother and Dad, well, 4 days have passed since I've written, but still there isn't an awful lot of news to give you. I can say I've been on quite a few raids in those days, but outside of that, the rest is all censored. As you probably already understand, I do my own censoring, and sometimes I'm stuck to censor enlisted men's mail. However, my mail may be censored at times. It's more or less a spot censoring, just to see if I'm putting in anything I shouldn't. In case I did, I'd probably run into plenty of trouble. Incidentally, you needn't address my letters second lieutenant anymore, as it's been first for a while, and the next is captain. Cocky, ain't I? Just address them lieutenant, and you can forget the first. In planning my return home, you'd better figure on next spring or summer. If everything goes well, it should be along about that time when I'll be permitted to go home on leave. Let's hope by that time there'll be no need for returning to this theater. I don't believe it'll last that long. Suppose you've been reading a lot about fortress raids, and when it says 10 failed to return, you've had a twitch around the heart. Well, don't worry. To the best of my ability, I'm attempting to bring my ships and crew home safely. The rest is in God's hands, and He's always done pretty well with us folks. Well, the big push, as far as we're concerned, seems to be on. With the winter weather coming on, tempo will decrease. With the winter weather coming on, the tempo will decrease. But at every chance, we'll be giving them plenty. Listen to New York win their third game of the series last night. I've got a pound bet on them, so you'd better come through. Yesterday, I received 2 letters, one from Betty, and Mother's was dated September 20th. I've only had 1 letter from Margaret A. since I landed here. She usually writes a lot, so must be she's addressing them wrong. In 20 minutes, I've got to take a shower, change my clothes, and get to 5:30 mess, so adieu for now. Your loving son, J. Bruce. P.S. Do you think the ledger will be sent over here?
Aw, Ledger gets a shout out. Oh, in England. Yeah, he's really trying to downplay it here.
Doesn't sound like it was Black Week,
Not according to this
Not
letter.
according to him, yeah.
Yeah, he's really trying to ease his parents' fears about all this. And I mean, I know he can't give details, but geez, he's like, not a lot of news going on. Been on a few raids, but that's about it. I mean, yeah, he's really downplaying it.
Well, 10 failed to return. That's a far cry from 88. But
Yeah, downplaying that too. But Bruce did win his bet. The Yankees won the World Series that year. So I don't know. He wins a pound. He bet a pound. I don't know what he was going to win. But before we end today, I want to reiterate that Bruce's photographs from the air on these missions of Black Week are going to be on the Lowell Historical Museum website. We're going to put them on Instagram. So, yeah, you can see Poland from the air. And you can see he's got photos from Gdynia and Bremen and I think in Frankfurt for sure. Maybe even Munster. I think even though
Yeah, he does.
make
I
it over
remember
there.
that
I'm pretty sure Munster was in there.
Coesfeld's might be on there too.
Yeah,
I looked
Could
at them
be.
the other day.
could be.
A lot of them are in there. I know that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to Letters Home. We hope you continue to listen as we go through Bruce's story. You can listen to Letters Home on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the Lowell Historical Museum website and YouTube channel. New episodes drop every Thursday. The Lowell Historical Museum has digitized versions of Bruce's letters so you can read them in full, along with primary sources for most of the people, places, and events we've talked about here today, plus more. You can also follow the Lowell Historical Museum on Facebook and the Letters Home podcast on Instagram at Letters Home Lowell. Thank you to Roger McNaughton for our podcast music and to WRWW 92.3 FM for letting us record in their studio at Lowell High School every week. Tune in or stream WRWW at lowellradio.org. See you next time.